Good morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Paul Badger, Barry Foster, John McLean, Linda Newstrom-Lloyd, and Nick Willis for helping with the design and interpretation of the survey. And thanks also to Eve for introducing COLOS, because so much of what we've done was based on the COLOS survey. And I also want to acknowledge beekeepers, particularly many of you in this room, for sharing your data with us. I'm going to present a wealth of data to you today, and I'm going to go through some of it a little bit quickly. So if it's a little bit too fast for you, please come and find me at the Landcare Research stand or at the Apiculture New Zealand focus group stand for more information. So the survey in New Zealand was first conducted in 2015, and the purpose is to measure losses over winter. It was supported by MPI and the beekeeping industry. And as I said before, it's modeled on international COLOS surveys. Anybody who's registered as a beekeeper is eligible to participate in the survey. And last year we sent email invites to everyone for whom we had an email address. That was over 5,750 beekeepers. Those with 400 or more hives were especially encouraged to participate. And you will know that you received follow-on phone calls from us. I'd like to give you, I need to be able to see my mouse. Yeah. I'm going to give you a sense of how the survey actually looks. In this case, I have 20 apiaries, and they're located in the Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty. And for the sake of argument, they're all within 15 kilometers of one another. Might have 200 production colonies overall. The survey asks whether any were added, or whether I sold over any winter, and then how many were alive in the spring, and in this case we have 180 that were alive in the spring. So the survey is smart enough to do the calculation for you that you lost 20 colonies. And then it asks what are the causes of those colony losses. In this case we had some due to queen problems, some due to colony death, which would include things like starvation and toxicity, varroa, etc. Some due to wasps, and even some possibly due to causes that I'm unsure about. Then for each of those that we ticked, there's some additional information gathered, and it's going to get into the queen questions now. Now for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to be presenting quite a number of figures, and to make sure that people are comfortable with the figures, I want to go through some examples just to make sure that we're all on board. First are pie charts, and I think everybody is familiar with pie charts. Okay. We also look at bar graphs. In bar graphs, we read on the y-axis, that is the vertical axis there. So in this case, we're looking at the share of beekeepers whose bees had a significant flow on clover, and in the upper North Island, it's 65%, and in the middle North Island, it's 80%. Now, related to bar graphs are histograms, and histograms are just a little bit different because they're actually a continuous mathematical calculation on the bottom there. These are numbers, right? So in this case, we had the share of hives that were lost to disasters was 0% of hives lost to disasters for 80% of the respondents. And because this is a continuous mathematical function, we can also calculate a mean. An average overall of 3% lost to disasters. Finally, we can look at word clouds. Now, word clouds are perhaps the least familiar for people, and so I want to explain what a word cloud is. To create a word cloud, I took the front page of the sports section in yesterday's Stuff, and I put it into a word cloud, and this is what people were talking about. Okay, so you can see that on Stuff, penalty was mentioned much more often than was the word forward, and that was mentioned much more often than the word accidental. So the size of the word is how often something was mentioned. Everybody happy with those figures? So now we're going to get into some results. Our estimates for hive losses are based on reports of 275,000 hives. This is 40% of the hive total in New Zealand as of June 2016. And just to give you a sense, these are the numbers that are reported in similar surveys conducted elsewhere in the world. Apart from the US and Canada, we report on more hives than anywhere else. And in fact, we report on roughly as many hives as all of Western Europe combined. These are large numbers, and that means that the statistics are very accurate. We're able to break it down by regions, and you'll see that some regions we're able to report on even have more than, we have more hives in some regions than say, France is able to report on. We estimate, based on these numbers, that hive losses over winter last year were 9.78% of all hives in the country. Of course, there's some regional variation in this figure. But if we just take a look at the overall losses, 9.78% compares relatively favorably to world losses. It puts us in the bottom 25% of losses. Now, the next question to ask is, what is the cause of the loss? Or that is, what did beekeepers attribute these losses to? And there were three things above all else that they reported. That was colony death, with about 48%. 29% people said queen problems, and about 12% of people said wasps. Now, there are lots of other sources of losses, including AFB, theft, natural disasters, Argentine ants, and other causes. These were reported much less frequently. So I'd like to talk about these three big causes: colony death, queen problems, and wasps. With colony death, you can see that colony death was a major cause of losses in most of the country. Queens came in second. Now, I'm going to present results to you by region. I'm also going to present results to you by operation size. We had 2,092 respondents overall. This was 38% of all registered beekeepers, and it's over 50% of beekeepers that had at least 400 hives. We're going to break them down into these four categories: non-commercial operators with 1 to 50 hives, semi-commercial operators with 51 to 500 hives, commercial operators with 500 to 3,000 hives, and large commercial operators with more than 3,000 colonies. So the share of colonies lost over winter 2016 varies by operation size. For the commercial and large commercial operators, it's about 8.5%. For non-commercial operators, including hobbyists, it's 17%. We can compare this to the average commercial losses in the US for 2016 of 25.6%. Now, colony losses also, the attribution of colony losses also vary according to the size of the operation. Colony deaths were more common in smaller operations, and queen problems were more common in larger operations. This figure reports the share of colonies lost due to colony death by geography. Colony death includes categories such as starvation and toxicity, nosema, and varroa. In the Upper North Island, colony death was the attributed cause of 29.7% of losses, and in the Middle South Island, it was 47.4%, so quite a bit of regional variation. Now, the survey asked some additional questions to try to unpack what we mean by colony death. We're not really asking beekeepers to take their bees to the lab in order to figure out exactly what the cause is, but there's some things that beekeepers can figure out just by looking inside the hives. And this includes signs of toxicity and signs of starvation. This figure shows you the signs of starvation and toxicity or unsure or other causes by region. And you can see overall that 37% of losses that were assigned to colony death showed signs of starvation, and 31% showed signs of toxic exposure. Now, one method to mitigate toxin loads embedded inside the colonies is to replace wax brood combs with new foundation. Beekeepers replaced 16.5% of brood combs on average, with the highest level of replacement in the Middle South Island and the lowest level of replacement in the Upper North Island. Non-commercial beekeepers reported replacing just 7% of brood combs on average. Moving on to queen problems. I seem to have lost the presentation, and I don't quite know how to get it back. Are the technical people able to help with that? Looks like it. Okay. And maybe I can just click through to get it where we were. You can? Just a bit further. I'll take over from here. And my mouse is not working, so you need to keep going. Okay, it's on me again. Okay, so share of colonies lost to queen problems. It was about 32% in the Middle South Island and 50.9% on the Lower South Island. But one of the things that's interesting here is that everyone who lost colonies on the Lower South Island reported queen problems. But overall, respondents in the Lower South Island said that queen problems were about average last year. Moving on to wasps. The share of colonies lost due to wasps is quite high in the North Island, about 12% overall, and wasps are a much smaller problem on the South Island, causing only about 3% of colony losses. So one of the things that we were curious about is the relationship between willow honeydew and wasp losses. Willow honeydew is produced by giant willow aphid, and willow honeydew is attractive to both honeybees and wasps. So we expect that in places where you have a large honey flow or nectar flow from willow honeydew, we might also see higher losses due to wasps. And sure enough, among beekeepers whose bees had a significant flow on willow honeydew, 19.3% of their losses were attributed to wasps versus 11.5% for those who did not have a significant flow on willow honeydew. Now, one of the nice things that we're able to do in the survey is ask some open-ended questions about the opportunities and challenges facing beekeepers, and this is what people said in terms of opportunities. No surprise here, it's Manuka honey. When we asked about challenges, there were two things that really stood out: varroa and overcrowding. So I'm going to talk about varroa and overcrowding with the rest of the time that I have. So, right, I'm hoping you can get that back again. Okay. 3/4 of beekeepers reported deformed wing virus or signs of deformed wing virus. And I'll take over from here again. Okay. So 3/4 reported signs of deformed wing virus, which of course is associated with varroa, though it's much less common in the Lower South Island. So it's much more commonly reported among commercial beekeepers, and especially large commercial beekeepers. So there's two possible explanations for this difference. One, it may be that deformed wing virus occurs more commonly in commercial operators' production colonies. Alternatively, they could be better at diagnosing this. In terms of methods for monitoring Varroa, I'm going to let you keep working on it, and I'm just going to keep talking at this point, sharing the results. We asked about methods for monitoring Varroa, and 73% of non-commercial operators and about 60% of commercial operators do some type of monitoring. Now, the flip side of that is that 27% of non-commercial operators and 40% of commercial operators do no monitoring whatsoever, okay, which I think is quite concerning. In terms of Varroa treatment, amitraz and flumethrin are used extremely widely, almost to the exclusion of any other treatment. One positive indication of this suggests that both treatments are still continuing to work well. On the other hand, heavy reliance on only two treatments provides greater exposure, potentially allowing Varroa to more rapidly develop resistance. This figure shows you the number of apiaries and the number of beekeeping operations in 1945. There were 6,500 operators and almost 9,500 apiaries. And here's how these figures have grown today. The number of beekeepers has increased by 20% over that time, whereas the number of apiaries has increased by 427% over that time. So that suggests that overcrowding is going to be a real issue. Overcrowding, of course, can lead to either sites being overtaken by other beekeepers or sites being compromised due to other beekeepers being operating close by. Apiary sites being overtaken by other beekeepers is more common in the North Island, particularly in those areas where Manuka honey is common. It's uncommon in the Middle and Lower South Island. The share of apiary sites that have been compromised due to overcrowding also follows a very similar pattern, where it's quite common in the North Island and much less common in the South Island. So as we look back to these opportunities and challenges, I'd like to suggest that there's a real link between the opportunity, particularly around Manuka, and the challenges, particularly around overcrowding. So I'm just going to wrap up by sharing a couple of results just in summary. First of all, relative to 2015, the number of beekeepers that participated in the survey increased from 327 to 2,092, about 40% of all registered beekeepers in the country. Colony losses in 2015 were 10.7%, 2016%, 9.8, in 2016 they were 9.8%. These numbers are statistically indistinguishable, so they're low, but similar. There are, however, important regional differences in colony losses. In some areas, you have higher losses than elsewhere. And colony losses are higher among non-commercial beekeepers than they are among commercial beekeepers. And the big three causes are colony death, queen problems, and wasps. The 2017 survey will launch late August. You can expect an email from me to come to you, and we want everyone to participate, so we very much hope that you will. If you'd like to make sure that you're included, please visit the Landcare Research booth, which is just right out here, and share your email addresses with us. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the rest of the conference and sharing the results with you. Thank you.